Good afternoon, good evening. Orinoco Tribune has turned 4 years old, this month. So it was founded in November 2018 in Caracas, Venezuela, by Jesús Rodríguez Espinoza, who is here, as a voice of Chavistas to the world to disseminate real information from inside Venezuela with a Chavista perspective and in English also, in order to break the language barrier between Chavismo and the world and to reach the people, especially of those countries whose governments are inflicting the blockade against Venezuela. A news outlet like this is essential because economic blockade does not exist alone. There is also a media blockade against Venezuela, against Chavismo, against the Bolivarian Revolution, against the Venezuelan people. And this blockade amplifies a small but very well funded, US funded and US backed extreme right in Venezuela and suppresses the thoughts and opinions and real news of everyday Venezuelans. So, Orinoco Tribune was founded with the aim of giving a voice to those people who are invisibilized in mainstream media and who are basically erased from mainstream media. So, just putting these people in the forefront is what Orinoco Tribune aspires to. In addition, our vision is not confined to Venezuela only. We also have a Latin American and global dimension because we believe that Bolivarianism is not confined to Venezuela, but it is everywhere in the global south as well as in the whole world because we believe in Chavez's vision and spirit of internationalism. So today we are going to talk about just that, about our basic principle, our spirit. We call ourselves Chavistas. That is what the Orinoco Tribune webpage says at the top. So, what is Chavismo? What is its history? And what is it doing? Where is it going? And what has it got to do with us? So, these things will be discussed today by the editor of Orinoco Tribune, Jesus. And please ask your questions in YouTube. We are live streaming in YouTube. You can ask in the chat. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible. We'll have a sort of discussion after Jesus has finished his presentation. However, before going into today's topic, I must remind you all that we are an independent media outlet, which means that we do not receive financial support from any corporation nor from any government, irrespective of what Wikipedia may claim. We depend entirely on donations from you, from our readers or followers. And we would not have been able to function without you. So thanks a lot for your support for the last 4 years. And please continue to support us. Continue to support financially with donations because that is what on which we depend, as well as by reading and sharing our articles and spreading the word. At present, our annual fundraising is going on, so please consider donating whatever little you can. We have a goal of reaching $200 monthly donations. So help us reach that modest aim at a time like this when everything is so expensive. And now I will hand this over to Jesus, who is an expert in international relations, Venezuelan politics, and communication. And he served for many years as the Consul General of Venezuela in Chicago, in the United States. So today, let's see with what knowledge and as a diplomat and media expert he comes to us. Okay, Jesus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sahili, for the presentation and for being there. And thank you, all of you, Compass, our followers of Orinoco Tribune, and that right now we are celebrating our 4th anniversary. And you say it fast, but it means a lot of work. It means a lot of effort from many people. All our team that right now is getting bigger and stronger, but I believe it's important to recognize the work that they has been doing, and also to recognize the work that you are doing, the readers I'm talking about, the followers in supporting us, in reading us, and letting us know about the mistake that we might have committed. So right now, what I'm gonna do is to share my screen in order for you to see a slideshow that I prepared for today. basically with the things that I want to talk about. So I hope that you can see the slideshow there. It's loading. And I'm gonna begin. The whole idea of this presentation is to talk a little bit about Chavismo. But before doing that, I mean, for doing that, we need to go a little bit back in time, even to pre-independence Venezuela and the independent process in Venezuela, because Chavismo has a lot of things to do with that process, especially when we talk about Simón Bolívar. So let me start from that particular moment, and I want to try to do it as brief as I can. It's a lot of information that I'm gonna skip, so that's why I want all our editorial team, Franz, Uni, Sarah, Sahili, and anyone from the team that join us later to interrupt me. I don't want this to be like a lecture or something. If you find something that I'm saying that is not that you don't understand, or that you believe is a mistake or something like that, feel free to interrupt me, because my slogan is I'm not perfect. I'm far from perfect. So we are human beings and we commit mistakes. So but I have to begin talking about the Spanish colonization and all the bad things that it brought to our region. I'm talking about caste-based society. I'm talking about slavery. I'm talking about religion and, forced in religious indoctrination. I'm talking about classism, racism, supremacy. All those things came here from Europe. And of course that ignite a response from our people here, and that take us to mention all the Cimarronery revolts that happen in Venezuela, but all over Latin America, the indigenous resistance that was also very significant, and all those events somehow triggered the independent process from within Latin America. But of course, there were also, triggers for the independence process that came from abroad, from Europe mainly. So one of those things was the foreign trade monopoly, which was in the hands, of course, of the Spanish crown. So in the case of Venezuela, Casa Guipuzcoana was the company. Like the British have it's British Indian company or whatever name they had. We had in Venezuela Casa Guipuzcoana, and the Spanish had the monopoly of the trade over Latin America or over its colonies, and that of course created. You will see during my slideshow. Let me stop a little bit there. This imperialism alerts, arrows, and smearing campaigns or misinformation alerts, arrows all over the presentation, because I wanted to highlight those things, because I mean, basically what happened with that monopoly in foreign trade was that many countries in Europe, not Spain, of course, wanted to have control of that trade with Latin America also, and that was part of the foreign push towards the independence movement in our region. So the British were very active in that. And of course, another foreign igniter for the independence movement in our region was the crisis in Europe with the fall of Ferdinand VII in Spain. Basically, the occupation of Spain by the French empire. I mean, so that created the perfect environment for the independence movement that were also inspired by the U.S. Revolutionary War, the independence in the U.S. And the independence in Haiti also. And the whole Enlightenment process in Europe. So those were like the igniters for the independence movement in the region. In Venezuela, it began in 1810 with the Grito de Independencia, or what we call la Proclamación de Independencia, on April 19, 1810. So that was like the first move towards independence in Venezuela. And in 1811, in the 5th of July in 1811, we finally signed our first constitution with the signing of Declaration of Independence of Venezuela, more than 1 year later. And that process, we call it First Republic. And it ended with the capitulation of Francisco de Miranda, who was the commander of the independence military, to Monteverde, which was the commander of the Spanish military at that moment. And that ended up with Miranda being in jail and Simón Bolívar being sent to exile in Colombia, to the jungle. And it marks the end of the First Republic. From Colombia, Bolívar organized what we call the Campaña Admirable, the Admirable Campaign, which was basically a march, like a campaign that he launched from Colombia to Venezuela. And he finally entered Caracas after defeating the Spanish army in several places all over the west of Venezuela in 1813. And at that moment, Bolívar was first called the Liberator. And that Second Republic also didn't last too much, was short-lived, because many historians say that it was because the independence process and the Bolivar analysis of the reality in Venezuela did not properly understood the necessity of connecting with the indigenous movement, with the Creoles, with the Black movements. So that's why Boves show up during that Second Republic, and Boves was a Venezuelan that was pro-Spain, pro-monarchy, and that launched a bloody war that ended up with Bolivar basically being expelled and the independence armies being defeated. So Bolivar spent like 3 years, most of that time in the Caribbean. I'm talking between 1814 and 1817 in the Caribbean. And he understood then the necessity of interconnecting with the indigenous movement, with the Black movements, to bring them together to the independence movement. And that's when the Third Republic was launched, and it was marked by the Congreso de Angostura. But to do that, to arrive back to Venezuela, Bolivar received a lot of help from Haiti. That was the second, republic in the hemisphere after the U.S. that, gained independence from France. So it's important to highlight those things. And since 1817 until 1821, when we win the Battle of Carabobo, that marks like the final, defeat of the Spanish in Venezuelan territory, we call that process until 1830 the Third Republic. But during that Third Republic, from 1821 until 1830, Bolivar dedicated most of his efforts to achieve the independence in the rest of the continent. I'm talking about Nueva Granada, which is currently Colombia. I'm talking about Ecuador. I'm talking about Peru. I'm talking about Alto Peru, which is currently Bolivia, but was then part of Peru. I'm talking about Panama, which was part of Colombia at that moment, but was seceded by the pressure of the United States, because they wanted to have control over the canal, the Panama Canal. So Bolivar's idea was to have this Latin American, including Caribbean, unity bloc. And for that, he launched the Congreso de Panama, the Congress of Panama initiative that was heavily sabotaged by the U.S. And he also launched the whole idea of Gran Colombia, which is basically the nation that appears after, Bolivar consolidated the liberation of those countries that I mentioned before. So Bolivar managed to have his dream partly achieved by this big country called Gran Colombia, but in 1830, that dream finished when separatist movement within all those different provinces of Gran Colombia. I'm talking about Venezuela, I'm talking about Colombia, I'm talking about Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, began to request their independence from the Gran Colombia, as we call it. So that marks a big defeat for Simón Bolívar, and I believe that many historians believe that that also was part of Bolivar ending up being sick. Of course, you have to add assassination attempts and betrayals and things like that. But anyway, I want to jump right now to what happened in Venezuela after Bolivar's death, which was basically a succession of civil wars that began with Pais and Monagas that were kind of compadres and that controlled Venezuela from 1930 until almost 1860. And from that moment on, we have this succession of wars that we call the Federal Wars, where basically the most important figures were Ezequiel Zamora, Antonio Guzman Blanco, which was a modernizer, pro-France, pro-European president that ruled Venezuela for several years and that indebted Venezuela a lot with Europe. And we have Cipriano Castro that ended that process of, federal wars and civil wars in Venezuela that ruled Venezuela from 1899 until 1908. So it's important to highlight that during Cipriano Castro rule, we suffered in Venezuela the first imperialist blockade. I mean, basically, ships, military ships from Germany, Italy, and which was the other country? Germany, Italy. I believe that the Netherlands were there, but I'm missing one country. But anyway, basically what happened during that blockade is that Venezuelan coasts were blocked. I mean, physically blocked with several, I believe that there were like between 6 and 8 military vessels from those countries. And they didn't allow the entry of ships, and they were basically claiming Venezuela to pay a crazy debt that Guzman Blanco agreed with a German railroad project that he envisioned when he was ruling the country. During those years of Cipriano Castro, the most important income of Venezuela was coffee, and the price of coffee was going crazy in the world markets, and Venezuela suffers a lot from that. And Cipriano Castro was also kind of a nationalistic leader that decided not to pay, and it says that that debt was over, built, and that end up having us suffering that blockade for 3 months that ended up with an agreement signed in Washington in 1903, where basically Venezuela agreed to pay one fraction, I believe that 1/3 of the debt claimed by the European powers, and we ended that process. But that's another imperialist alert, because you see how the European or the foreign empires interfering in the domestic, political and the life in Venezuela. Of course, that imperialist process, I mean, that blockade doesn't have anything to do or in scale. I'm talking about with what happened what is happening right now in Venezuela. So I'm going to talk about that later anyway. But from 1908 until 1935, for almost 30 years, Juan Vicente Gómez, which was a compadre of Cipriano Castro, took control of the country. He did a coup d'etat. Basically, Cipriano Castro went to Europe for a surgical procedure, and Cipriano Castro took advantage of that situation, and he took control of the country. And during that moment, oil was beginning to be discovered in Venezuela. and was, I mean, basically the industrial north realized the importance of oil. So that's the moment where oil concessions and oil companies began to exploit and get concessions in Venezuela. And that leads to what some people, historians, call the modernization of Venezuela. And of course, Juan Vicente Gomez was very docile with those U.S. corporations, mainly U.S. corporations that began to exploit the oil in Venezuela, and that changed our economic landscape. A lot of people blame Venezuela for being too dependent of oil, but not too many people pay attention to how foreign forces intervene into our economic landscape in order to get what they wanted from us, which in our case was oil. So that particular phenomena alter the whole economic dynamic in Venezuela, transforming Venezuela from an agricultural country to a mining oil country that we still are up to date. So it's important to highlight that. It is important to highlight the influence of those U.S. corporations in the staying of power of Juan Vicente Gomez for that long dictatorship, which is the longest dictatorship that Venezuela has suffered in his history. After Gomez death, other compadres of him, Eleazar López Contreras and Isaías Medina Angarita, took control of the country. And they ruled basically for 10 more years, from 35 until 45. And they tried to open democratic processes in the country. Many historians agree with that. But in 1945, basically Acción Democrática, which is one of the most important parties of Venezuela, historically talking, launched a coup d'etat against Medina Angarita, and they began what is called the Trienio Adeco, which is basically those 3 years where they were accused of being extremely sectarian against other political parties, but they also moved the country into a more democratic, according to many historians, approach, more modern democracy, representative democracy approach, US style. So they ended up having elected Rómulo Gallegos as president of Venezuela in 1948. So between February and November 1948, Rómulo Gallegos was president of Venezuela, but he began to put taxes to oil companies. He was, according to some historians, he have some nationalistic approaches, and they organized a coup d'etat against him that ended up with him resigning in 1848. And that coup d'etat led to another bloody dictatorship in Venezuela, which is the Marcos Pérez Jiménez dictatorship that lasted from 48 until 58. And that was the last dictatorship in Venezuela. And it ended in January 23rd, 1958, and led to what we call the Punto Fijo Pact, which is basically an alliance between Acción Democrática, which is has always been a party that is center left, and COPEI, which always has been a party center right, and URD, which was like a division of Acción Democrática that some people call it to be a little bit to the left of Acción Democrática. So this is what happened in Venezuela during those years. And now I'm gonna jump to what we call the Fourth Republic, which is basically that moment between the ending of the coup d'etat against against Pérez Jiménez, and the arrival of Hugo Chavez to Miraflores. So during those years, Venezuela passed through different stages. One of the most relevant politically talking is the one connected to the guerrilla movement. Venezuela and many places in Latin America were influenced by the Cuban Revolution, and there were several guerrilla movements that appears in Venezuela in the 60s mostly, and the most important ones with the ones organized by MIR, Movimiento de Izquierda Revolucionaria, the PSB, the Communist Party of Venezuela, with his military arm, which was the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, FALN, and also the Socialist League have a lot of influence over those guerrilla movements that ended up being squeezed by the military and the political police of the time that was heavily infiltrated by the US intelligence until the 90s and maybe the 2000s. So it's important to highlight that because not too many people know that it was a guerrilla movement in Venezuela and that it was easily defeated by the end of the 60s. Some very tiny, small guerrilla movement lasted until the early 80s, but they were not really relevant. And during the 60s, Venezuela lived what we call the Saudi Venezuela, Venezuela Saudita. And that was the result of the astronomical increase in oil prices because of the creation of the OPEC, because of the Hormuz Strait crisis in 73, and a lot of revenue entered the country, and we live like in a bubble of wealth for maybe 1 or 2 decades between the late 60s and the early 80s. But in 1982, Venezuela suffered what is called the Black Friday, el Viernes Negro, where the Bolivar was devaluated heavily, and that created a terrible economic crisis in Venezuela that was fixed between quotations with the arrival of the second government of Carlos Andrés Pérez, which was a leader from Acción Democrática, and he implemented a liberal package, IMF-style shock, economic shock packages, and he pushed privatizations, reduction of the payroll of the state, all the things that IMF did before and is doing currently. And that didn't help us with anything, and that creates a lot of social tensions within Venezuela. And that was the igniter of El Caracazo, which was basically an uprising that happened in several cities in Venezuela in 1989. And somehow that's how Hugo Chavez first comes to light, or at least first, I mean, see his political, he saw at that moment his political call, because, I mean, he said several times when he was president of Venezuela, when he was alive, that he was among those military officers that were ordered to shoot at those demonstrators during the Caracazo, and he, among other military officers, realized that they were not going to do that. They were not going to shoot against the people. But of course, they were a minority. And during El Caracazo, there were, according to many experts, between 1,500 and 3,000 deaths in Venezuela due to police military repression. So since that moment, Hugo Chavez began organizing his rebellion within the military, but also in other, political, civil areas of Venezuela. And that leads to the military rebellion in 1992, el 4 de febrero, February the 4th, 1992. So that rebellion was not successful. Hugo Chavez was taken prisoner, And one mistake from the side of the right wingers that they did was to put Hugo Chavez in front of the cameras during those days, those hours. And during in that TV appearance of Hugo Chavez, he basically took responsibility for the coup, for the rebellion. And he also said that the objectives were not achieved for now, por ahora. And that por ahora get very deep into the brain of Venezuelans, because they meant for many like a wish of change, like the possibility of a future success of Hugo Chavez. And that was a critical moment in Venezuelan history. Hugo Chavez is taken prisoner and he was sent to jail for military rebellion, and that happened in 1992. And I believe that in 1995 he was pardoned by Rafael Cardera, that was the president elected. Sorry, in 1993, I believe. And Rafael Cardera from COPEI, which is center right, was elected, raising the flags of the political restoration of the country, and criticizing the neoliberal package of Carlos Andrés Pérez and everything that Hugo Chavez was saying that was running the country. But he did the opposite. I mean, he continued, I'm talking about Rafael Cardera, he continued with the neoliberal practices. Venezuela was privatized. Everything was, a lot of people were released from work. I mean, were fired. And we live in Venezuela from 89 to 99, neoliberalism salvaje, as we call it. And it's important to highlight that, because a lot of people believe that we jump from being Venezuela Saudi to Hugo Chavez government, which is not true. We live the terrible mistakes and the terrible craziness of IMF neoliberalism therapy shocks. For example, we had Iberia, which was our national airline, and it was sold to Iberia, the Spanish airline. Spanish did not last. I mean, it did not have control of Viasa for more than a year, when they decided to begin selling the planes by parts. And just because of that, Venezuela ended up with no airline. That's why our current Venezuelan airline, which is Conviasa, have that name. It was some sort of remembrance of Viasa, which was that airline that was destroyed by the neoliberalism. I put the flag there about misinformation alert, because during the presidential campaign of Hugo Chavez, when he went out of jail, many were not sure what to do. Many say that he didn't have to run for president, and many say that he had to go to, to subvert actions, to guerrilla fight and that kind of thing. But he decided otherwise. He decided to run for president, and he won the elections in 1998, and he took office in 1999. And but there was a humongous misinformation campaign, very similar to the misinformation campaigns you see during Lula's elections recently, during Petro's elections recently, during any elections where progressive forces are about to take control of a country, and they keep repeating that misinformation, that that president or candidate is going to take your house, that is going to repress the people, and all the lies that comes with anti-communism. And that is very rooted in our region because of all the campaign launched by the United States, at least in our region in the 50s and 60s. So that brought us to the moment of Chavismo properly. I'm talking about the period between 1999 and 2002. Right now, we have the constituent process. Please, guys, if you don't understand something, feel free to jump. Or if I say something wrong. And from 1999 until 2002, the first things that President Chavez did was approve the new constitution. The new constitution, la Constitución de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela, the Constitution of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, was shaped and approved in a referendum, which was the most important promise that Hugo Chavez launched during his presidential campaign, and he did it in less than 18 months, which is miraculous, because he was fighting with all the status quo that didn't want any change, like in many countries happen. So he managed to do that. We achieved our new constitution, and from that moment, I mean, a new scope of things happen in the country. I mean, I'm talking about, for example, the Cuba-Venezuela agreement, comprehensive agreement that was signed in 2000, and that we celebrated a few days ago, the 22 anniversary of that agreement, which is that basically allowed Mission Robinson to be launched in Venezuela. Mission Robinson was that campaign to eradicate illiteracy in Venezuela. With the help of the Cubans, we launched a Mission Barrio Adentro, which is that very important social program launched by Hugo Chavez with the help of medical doctors mainly, and was framed with that Cuba-Venezuela agreement signed in 2000. And many other social programs that the Venezuelan government launched a few years later came out of that agreement. That's why that agreement is very important for many Chavistas. But we didn't see the result of that agreement immediately. But meanwhile, Chavez was doing other stuff, like the recovery of oil prices around the 2000s. And during the year 2000, I mean, the oil prices went down terribly. The income in Venezuela was terribly affected. And he launched this aggressive campaign, visiting all the OPEC countries. And that's when they began satanizing also Hugo Chavez, because he visited Iraq, the leader of Iraq, and many other countries satanized by the US. And looking for an agreement, a formula to recover the oil prices. And in that campaign, launched by Venezuela was effective, and the prices of by the end of the 2000 or the beginning of 2001, the oil prices were gaining track again. And that's important for Venezuela, which is an oil country, of course. And but in 2001, by the end of 2001, the enabling laws were approved. And I'm talking about Ley de Tierras, which is the land law, and the fishery law, the oil law, hydrocarbon law, and other laws were approved, but those are the most important ones. And during that initiative, executive initiative that was took by Hugo Chavez, with enabling laws, executive orders, basically, that in order to move fast into the changes that he wants to do in Venezuela. And of course, that those laws implied a lot of things against the interests of the oligarchy in Venezuela. And that those laws were the triggers for the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2002. In April 11, 2002, Hugo Chavez was, there was a coup organized against Hugo Chavez. There were demonstrations against those laws that were launched since the beginning of January or February 2002. And they ended up with this big demonstration against Hugo Chavez in 2002. In April 2002, that this demonstration decided to march towards Miraflores. the presidential palace. And they ended up in a bloodshed that many in the media in Venezuela used to accuse President Chavez of being the responsible of massacring demonstrators, which later was proven to be a big lie, to be a manipulation of the reality. But that was part of the misinformation campaign needed in order to have the coup done. So Chavez was taken into custody, and one of the most amazing things that happened in Venezuela around Hugo Chavez is that they basically took him out of power, and he was out of power for like about 48 hours. But the Chavismo and social media and the strategy of Chavista forces in Venezuela moved the population, moved the Chavista forces on the ground to push the military in order to revert the coup d'etat. And that's what happened. I mean, basically, thousands of Venezuelans went to demonstrate against this coup d'etat when it was evident that it was a coup d'etat, because there was at the beginning a lot of confusion, even among many Chavistas. And then they pushed the military to recover Hugo Chavez from La Orchila, a military base, an island in the Caribbean, which is a military base, where they had captive Hugo Chavez, and they managed to bring him back. And that happened in less than 48 hours. And it's important to highlight the coup d'etats against Hugo Chavez in 2002, because many Chavistas, like me, for example, were heavily affected by what happened in the coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez. I mean, I'm talking about my personal case right now. I grew up in a leftist family. We talk about politics all the time. I went to the Soviet Union to study for several years. But I didn't consider myself at that moment. I was just like 23 years old at that moment. And I didn't consider myself, I mean, I consider myself Chavista, but I didn't saw that I need to do something else besides voting. And with the coup d'etat against Chavez in 2002, we realized, many Chavistas realized, that we needed to do more, that we needed to do more things in order to defend Chavismo and to make the Chavista revolution, the Bolivarian revolution, happen, be a reality. So that was like a breaking moment for millions of Venezuelans, if you ask me. And I include myself among them because before the coup d'etat against Chavez, I still believe in technocracy. I still saw that, things might happen without too much politics being involved. And then I realized that that was a big lie, that everything is politics, that every decision, even the ones taken with the cover of the appearance of technical decisions, always have a political analysis in the background, a political hand moving the strings in the background. So it's important to highlight that, because from that moment on, I realized that technocracy was a big lie. And of course, that the US and Spain participate actively in that coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez. And the coup d'etat was reverted, but a few months later, they launched the oil lockdown. The media, the right wingers, call it the PDVSA strike, which is a big lie, because the strike was only organized and led by the upper managerial, cast of PDVSA, that were a bunch of right wingers that called themselves technocrats, but at the and apolitical. And at the end of the day, they did one of the worst political manipulations and acts that has been done in this country, which was basically stopping oil production in Venezuela just because they wanted Hugo Chavez out of office. And that happened between December 2002 and February 2003. And the government managed to break that coup d'etat because that was another coup d'etat attempt there that affected heavily Venezuela. And the finances of Venezuela were heavily affected for 1 or 2 years after the oil strike, the oil lockdown, sorry. So we jump right now to what I call the radicalization of the Bolivarian Revolution that happened between 2003 and 2012. The misiones, which are many of them the result of that Cuba-Venezuela agreement, began to show results. I mean, we launched in 2003 Misión Robinson, Misión Barrio Adentro. And I put the arrow of misinformation on there because many people say that Venezuela was doing that because we had a lot of money or because a lot of income from oil revenue, and only because of that we were able to do that. And the truth is that even today, in the middle of the worst economic aggression that I believe any Latin American country has lived besides Cuba, Misiones are still alive. They are, of course, affected, but they are alive and moving on with all the craziness of the damage in the economy that the blockade of the US and Europe have caused in Venezuela. I'm talking about Mission Robinson, and Mission Robinson is that illiteracy program that was extremely effective and that helped us eradicate illiteracy in the majority of the population. And it did not end up there because that program was very comprehensive. I mean, basically, there were several misiones. We call Misión Robinson 1, Misión Robinson 2, Misión Rivas, Misión Sucre. They were like 4 or 5 different misiones connected to Misión Robinson, basically taking people from illiteracy to help them finish elementary school. And then from there, help them finish high school. And from there, they help them finish a technical, associate degree or maybe high-level degree. And that was an amazing program that is still there, but was incredibly effective and impactful during those years of between 2003 and 2008. Because during those years was the process where most of the people were taken out of illiteracy. And we also have Misión Barrio Adentro, which was basically putting medical doctors, and most of them Cuban doctors, in the poorest county towns in the country in order to provide free healthcare for many people that didn't have in their life any chance to go to a doctor because they didn't have money for that. So that was Misión Barrio Adentro. And like that, many other misiones has been launched since then. And that's why I call it the radicalization of the Bolivarian Revolution, because a lot of people realized what socialism was about. And that was, exemplified by those misiones. In 2004, we had the recall referendum. The opposition has always been there trying to oust Hugo Chavez and then President Maduro. They had this recall referendum launched, taking the provisions included in the new constitution promoted by Hugo Chavez. And they were defeated. And that was a very dramatic moment in Venezuelan life. And from there, we also jumped to, in the international arena, to the rejection or the defeat of the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, the FTAA, which was a trade initiative launched by the U.S. at that moment that wanted to allow the U.S. to export everything to our region and keeping us with a lot of restrictions to sell our stuff to the U.S., the traditional free trade U.S. style. and that created a new regional realignment. At the beginning, President Maduro was basically alone in political international scenarios in the region, besides Fidel Castro, that didn't participate in all the forums because the isolation that Cuba has during those years. And with the defeat of the free trade agreement of the Americas that happened in Mar del Plata in Argentina, and the main leaders were Hugo Chavez, Luis Ignacio Lula da Silva, Nestor Kirchner. This new political environment in the region was created that allowed the creation of ALBA TCP, of UNASUR, of CELAC, Petrocaribe, several integration, unity initiative that were created mostly by the initiative of Hugo Chavez and Fidel Castro, but also Lula participated in some of them. Evo Morales then joined the club, and Rafael Correa. So that created what many people call the pink tide in the region, because many progressive leaders took control of several governments in the region. So that's basically the environment in that particular moment between 2003 and 2012. And we had the constitutional reform in 2007 when Hugo Chavez wanted to get deeper into socialist reforms in the country, changing the constitution. I mean, that constitutional reform was defeated. That was one of the very small numbers of electoral defeats that Hugo Chavez had. And another element in that constitutional reform was the possibility of being reelected for any elected official indefinitely. That created a lot of misinformation. That's why I have the misinformation arrow there. Misinformation smearing campaigns all over the world. And the fact is that no one talks when they are criticizing that initiative of Hugo Chavez about Angela Merkel or Francois Mitterrand or Helmut Kohl or many U.S. Senators and congressmen and congresswomen that has been in elected positions for decades, and no one say anything about that. So that's part of the double standards and the hypocrisy of the North, that a lot of things work for them in the North, but when people in the South want to do something like that, it won't work for us because we are Indians and we are, according to their racist point of view, we are not able to do things well, allegedly. So we jumped from that to the constitutional amendment in 2009. And in that constitutional amendment, President Chavez basically asked one only questions in a referendum that was approved. In that case, and he basically asked if the Venezuelan people wanted the constitution to be amended to allow indefinite re-elections, and that was approved, and that's why President Chavez was finally re-elected a few years later. Then we come to Chavez's death, the transition from Chavez to Maduro, and that was a terrible moment in Venezuela. I'm talking about December 2012 is the moment where President Hugo Chavez made his last public televised appearance. He came from Cuba. He stayed for a few days in Venezuela, and he basically asked Venezuelans to vote for Hugo Chavez, sorry, for Nicolás Maduro, in the case he was not with us anymore. So at that moment, Hugo Chavez knew that something bad might happen to him, but a lot of people, Chavista leadership in Venezuela still believe that there was hope for Hugo Chavez to recover. So the death of Hugo Chavez took many by surprise, even though there were preparations and they were, like, as I say, this call that Hugo Chavez did in December 2012, asking Venezuelans to vote for Nicolás Maduro. And I put the misinformation arrow there because after Chavez death in March 2013, the presidential elections happened a few weeks later. And a lot of people say that it was Hugo Chavez that decided. I'm talking about the misinformation, the mass media campaigns, that Hugo Chavez appointed Maduro as president, and Maduro is president because of that, like a monarchy succession or something like that. And no one says that actually Maduro was elected. And it was a very complicated election because, I mean, a lot of people, including me, believe that we were going to win easily that election, take into consideration all the sentiments that arose when Hugo Chavez died. The country was mourning. Many millions of Venezuelans were crying when Hugo Chavez died. And many of us assumed that was like a clue to believe that, allow us to believe that President Maduro was going to win easily. And the reality was different. I mean, Maduro won that election, but with a margin of 5% or something like that, which is not a terrible margin. Actually, Lula da Silva just won an election with 2%, and no one criticized that. But when Maduro won that election in 2013, all the media criticized that he won only by 5%. Anyway, I now talk about the first part of the President Maduro's government, and it begins with riots. I mean, Maduro have not had a second of peace since the moment he was elected. They were riots just a few hours after the results were announced of the elections in April 2013, of right-wingers not recognizing the results and calling for fraud without proving anything, just calling fraud out of the blue. They were regional elections a few months later in December 2013, and Chavismo won again. And that defeat was more clear, more easy, and of course that make them realize that was not going to be easy, because they were thinking that they were going to get rid of Maduro very fast, that Maduro was not Chavez, and that Maduro has not the charisma of Chavez, and all the things that you read in mainstream media everywhere. But Maduro has been showing us that he have a different approach, but that he is still rooted within the Chavismo, movement. And that's why that victory in December 2013 in regional election happened, and that move to the guarimbas in February 2014. Those guarimbas were basically violent protests that are portrayed by mainstream media as peaceful protests, but in reality are very violent, and that ended up with some people being put in jail, and those guarimbas were called La Salida. And after those guarimbas, one of the main results of those guarimbas is that we put Leopoldo Lopez in jail because he was one of the main organizers of those guarimbas who were aiming at ousting President Maduro, as always has been the case in the Venezuelan opposition since 2006. Sorry, since the very beginning of Hugo Chavez taking power, actually. So after that, we enter into a process of deepening of the economic crisis. I'm talking about between 2013 and 2017, the exchange rate control that at the beginning, many, including me, believe that was positive, start Aceraguas start, showing cracks, and the gap between the black market exchange rate and the official exchange rate widened a lot. Sorry, and that created the space for corruption, and that created a lot of distortions on the economy. And at that moment, if you ask me, they were not very good economic advisors. And they make many of us, including me, believe that keeping the exchange rate control was a good thing, and keeping the price control was another good thing, and that not paying attention to monetary discipline was also the right thing to do. But the reality showed us a few years later that was not the case. And we jump in that particular environment, we had the legislative elections, the parliamentary elections of December 2015. And those elections were won by the right-wingers. And that takes us to the second part of the government of Nicolás Maduro, basically with the opposition being in control of the National Assembly between 2015 and 2021, and exercising everything possible to oust Maduro. They called for vacancy of the presidency, basically saying that he was not the president. They try insanity. They try guarimbas in 2017 that were very lengthy and bloody. Then we had the executive order in 2015, basically Obama setting the framework for all the set of sanctions and blockade that the US and then Europe launched against Venezuela. And that's, of course, an imperialist alert, because since the moment of the approval of the executive order, a lot of things changed in Venezuela. And the attack against Venezuela from abroad got stronger. And that takes us to the second term of Maduro that wins the elections in 2018, because many of the opposition parties decided not to run because they wanted to subvert the elections. They received those orders from the US. And that's the only reason why you read in a lot of mainstream media out there that 2018 elections were illegitimate or were questioned or whatever. Yes, because they had that strategy already set up. But Maduro won those elections, and the turnout, the amount of people that voted for him was very important. But they keep calling it trouble elections, because that's part of the script that they already had to try to oust Nicolás Maduro. And then he took office in 2018. There were assassinations attempts with drones against him. And then they launched the Guaidó project in 1919 with this stupid idea of having an interim president that is not anywhere in the Venezuelan constitution. Is illegal, it's unconstitutional. But they keep pushing that narrative, and a lot of people out there believe all these lies that mainstream media shows launch against President Maduro and promoting this crazy idea of the Guaidó project. They launched after that. They radicalized the blockade against Venezuela, the sanctions against Venezuela, the diplomatic isolation with the Lima group. You name it. They have tried everything possible, including the military mercenary incursions like Operación Gideon that they launched in, I believe that it was in 2020. And then that ended up with the gringos coming back this year to Miraflores and sit with Maduro, and Cilia Flores pidiendo cacao, as I always say, basically with the energy crisis knocking on their doors, and they realizing that they needed the Venezuelan oil. So that's where we are at this moment. We Chavistas are, just to finish the slideshow, I just want to say that Chavismo, after everything that I already told you, and I'm saying this because Sahili mentioned me something about that, and I want to end up my words just trying to explain what Chavismo is for me. And Chavismo is, for me, Chavismo is this idea of this sentiment of wanting to build a more just society, wanting to build a society based in solidarity, wanting to have a Latin American and Caribbean continent region united with the concept of Patria Grande, with the concept of Pachamama, and of course wanting to move towards socialism, towards a society more democratic and less, and to get rid of the dictatorship of the oligarchy, which is basically what most of the people around the world are suffering right now, and that's what socialism for me. And it also includes religion. I'm not a religious person, so I don't identify with that side of Chavismo, but I recognize that many Chavistas identify themselves also like religious, like Christians in terms of Jesus Christ and his ideas of justice and equality, and those things that many people believe in, and I believe are also part of the idea of Chavismo. So guys, I believe that I'm ready. I already talked too much and no one interrupted me, and that's very bad. At some points, I saw that I was talking to myself. I hope that doesn't happen because sometimes my internet is faulty. I'm just joking. I just want to invite everyone, Franz, Sahili, Sara, Uni, Roberto, anyone from my team to join us. I'm just putting you in gallery view in order for you to be viewed. Please turn on your cameras and your mics. I want to see your faces to know if I'm not alone here talking to myself.
No, no. Actually, people were
It was
very
a great presentation.
Thank you, compa. Thank you. Feel free to ask the questions that you want, guys.
Okay, so now actually we should first take some things from whatever people had asked. So
That's fine.
I already put two questions here, and there is another that's important. But anyway, so first of all, I think this is important that you mentioned the enabling laws, especially the Ley de Tierras, Ley de Hidrocarburos, and others. So what were these? What were these laws about? Like, because it said, and it's true that because of these laws being passed, there was the coup against Chavez. So what were exactly these laws? How did they help people, and how did they take away privileges from the privileged so that there was the coup?
Yes, that's a good question. Basically, I mean, the land law was a terrible threat for the land oligarchy here in Venezuela. The people that control the lands, the latifundistas, as we call it. And of course, because it allowed the government to take control of tierras ociosas, as we call it. I don't remember how is that translated into English, but it's basically idle lands, I believe, lands that are not used, but that belongs to certain latifundista. So that was a big threat for many latifundistas in Venezuela that didn't want to lose their privilege, their land. And the government, even with that law, was not talking about expropriation or something like that. The government was talking about buying back those lands in order to give it to the people that really need them, to the campesinos. But right wingers are like that. I mean, they just want to keep their privilege. They don't want to make any concessions ever. It's like in the US. I mean, they are talking about firing tens of thousands of people in the US or Canada or Europe because of the crisis, but they are making billions of dollars in profits, and you wonder, how is that possible? I mean, how is possible that they are making more money than ever, and they are talking right now about uh, firing 10,000s of people. So the same thing happened here, but of course in small scale. In this particular area, we're talking about land, and that was a threat for them, and they move every possible tecla key in order to get rid of Chavez because of that. And the fishery land was another important land because Chavez decided basically to get rid with those laws of the la pesca de arrastre is the name in Spanish. It's basically the fisher the fishing industry based in having those big nets and taking between two ships and taking into those nets everything that they can get. And that was that with that law, pesca de arrastre in Venezuela was forbidden, and the right to fish was given back to the small fishermen, because that pesca de arrasque kill most of the possibilities of the the small fishermen to really make a living, because they were taking all the fish, and that happened everywhere. Let me tell you, and not people talk too much about that terrible, practice, but that what that fishing law means. One of the most important things that happened, and basically that affected the interests of many capitalists that had their business, their monopolies operating, and they didn't want that to be changed. So that's basically the background or the impact of those laws in changing the status quo in Venezuela, in strengthening the dictatorship of the oligarchy in the country. And of course, they push everything they could to get rid of Hugo Chavez. And they did it for 24 hours, thankfully, only.
Yeah, if I can just only add a very small comment, that most of those lands that the landlords, big landlords were holding, most of it was not even being used for agriculture. I was reading that more than 80% of that land was just owned by those latifundistas and not even used for cultivation. So the land law actually helped or should help in agriculture also. But anyway, that is a different thing, I guess. I think I would ask
But
you
I know that
another
you want to
thing
go
that
to
people
the
ask.
land reform, right?
Yes, actually yes, because I do, and I think that this like the land law, this law could actually connect to the land reform. And let's talk about it. It's not just simply land reform, it's a agrarian reform, because it should also transform agriculture itself. So anyway, so let's, I mean, if you would just talk a bit about the land reform, and then I think we can
I
go
believe
to
that the land reform was
other
an
questions.
amazing policy that Hugo Chavez led. Amazing. It was not aggressive, and because Hugo Chavez was not aggressive. I mean, at some point they put him, in the corners, and sometimes he had to be like tough. But the whole idea of the Chavista, the Bolivarian Revolution, was not to do things like a la mala. He wanted, and we had resources to buy back land when we expropriate certain transnationals or private companies. He paid those, most of those companies at least. So I'm mentioning that to you because the land reform was also moving in that sense. And a lot of land was given back to campesinos in the country, and and they were also in that land reform was not only did not ended up with giving back the land. I mean, a lot of loans were given to campesinos in order to pay for machinery, to pay for what is needed to, and also technical advice. I mean, it was a very comprehensive approach that helped us. I believe that we are seeing right now, besides all the criticism, but that some mistake might happen in the land reform process, we are seeing right now, in the middle of this blockade and sanctions against Venezuela, we are seeing that we were capable of feeding ourselves, disregarding being an economy based on oil. I mean, distorted by the whole oil boom that affected us in 1808. So So I believe that that's like a general review. There were a lot of criticism, and of course, during these recent years, that we don't haven't have enough resources because of blockade, economic crisis, sanctions, everything. A lot of programs has been broken. And I cannot say that everything is, color de rosas right now here. I mean, in the contrary, it's complicated. But I believe that the results in general of the land reform that was launched by Hugo Chavez were very positive. They could be better, of course, but we are seeing the results right now. We can jump to the other question if you want. If you are
France
okay
was
with
going
my
to ask
answer.
something. No. Yeah, France was going to ask something. France, why don't
Mm,
you turn on your?
Hola, Jesus. Just a quick question. I just want to know what your reaction was to the U.S. licensing Chevron with the GL-41, and what
yes,
it means
yes.
for the near future in Venezuela.
Yes, we wrote something about that a few days ago. And basically, in Orinoco Tribune, I mean, we published something a few days ago about our take on that particular um, recent event, and also about the agreement that was signed within the framework of the Mexico talks. And basically, what I believe happened is that the gringos came back pidiendo cacao, and they need all the oil they can, and the energy lobby led by Chevron has a lot of strength uh, uh, over the White House, at least at this moment, and they basically use the excuse of the Mexico talks to allow its company Chevron to finally, because they has been rumoring that this was going to happen, I believe that for a year or so. So that it finally happened. They use the excuse of the Mexico talks, and it will also help killing the Guaido project, if you ask me, because the gringos don't know how to get rid of that crazy project launched by Trump, but they don't want to do it like too too visible. So they are gonna do that by steps. So the whole scene is positive, as you asking. I mean, even though Chevron doesn't represent more than like 10% of what Venezuela produced in the most recent best moment of oil production in the country. I mean, they only produced like 200,000 barrels per day, which is something relatively important for some countries, but for us it's nothing, and it's like 10% of our best output in recent years, because our best output ever was around 3.2 million barrels per day in the best moment in Venezuelan history, but that was like 15 years ago or so. So anyway, I mean, that represents an additional income which we need. We talk a lot about economic recovery. In Orinoco Tribune, we publish a lot of information about that, and that is a fact. But another fact is that economic recovery is not enough to move the country, move on with the country, with the projects that the country needs. I mean, to move a country like Venezuela, like most countries, you need millions of dollars in income. If you want to improve the electric projects that we need to recover our electric infrastructure, for example, if you need to recover the road infrastructure that has been not attended in recent years because of all the things that we know, to recover the energy, the telecommunication problems, the water problems that we have, you name it, we have all the problems possible. And I want to highlight that, because sometimes when we talk too much about economic recovery, some people might have the wrong impression that everything here in Venezuela is perfect, that they have to move back to Venezuela, or Venezuela se arregló, kind of, slogan that the right wingers use a lot in social media. Venezuela got fixed. Venezuela se arregló is in Spanish. And they use it a lot in social media to complain about many Venezuelans that have been returning in recent years to Venezuela, in recent months. But that's not a reality. I mean, we have a lot of problems, and that income that will arrive to Venezuela from that license will help us a little bit. It will be an additional income that will come out of the oil exploitation, but also because of the investments that Chevron needs to do inside Venezuela to hire more people, to pay for services, to restart, pumping up oil, which is not an easy process. I mean, those are processes. Some people believe that you just have to switch, como es, una válvula and everything, and the oil will start pumping, and it's not like that. You need to drill, I mean, it's a complex process that needs a lot of investment. So it's going to be positive in that sense. So many Chavistas here believe that that's something positive, that is an achievement for Nicolás Maduro, that has been saying that we are open to do that for months already. So it finally happened. So it's okay, if you ask me. There are some critics, of course. They say, how are you going to sell oil to the gringos and blah, blah, blah. Come on, man. I mean, we are not a kiosco. We are not like a grocery store that I hate that guy, and I won't sell my stuff to him. I mean, it's a country that have its needs, that has its strategic, decisions that needs to be taken. And Maduro was talking about that a few minutes ago. He was giving a press conference in Miraflores Palace a few minutes ago, and he was saying, we are going to sell our oil. We always have been saying that we are going to sell our oil to whoever need the oil. We only want it to be at fair prices, and that they don't believe that they will tell us the price of the oil, or give us directions on how to sell the oil, or not, that they are not going to follow our laws and our constitutional, decisions. And I believe that comment that he did about the laws and the constitutional decisions have a lot of things to do with those narratives that has been launched in mainstream media after the approval of that license, because the wording of that license make many people believe that Chevron is going to operate in Venezuela for free. I mean, that they are going to take the oil, and that they are not going to pay royalties, or because the license says so. And the truth is that the Venezuelan law do not allow that to happen. I mean, if Chevron will operate in Venezuela, they will have to pay taxes, royalties, and whatever they have to pay. But of course, they twist language, and basically they are playing with words in order to make it believe that Chevron won't pay. But in reality, the one that is going to pay those royalties in Venezuela are the joint ventures. I mean, Petroboscana, Petropiar, that are the joint ventures of Chevron with PDVSA. I mean, foreign companies do not operate in Venezuela alone. They operate with joint ventures with Venezuela, where those foreign companies have the minority in the stake, and PDVSA has the majority. That's the working model that Hugo Chavez imposed in the hydrocarbon law, that was also part of those enabling laws in 2001. So, I mean, that's part of and that, of course, a lot of corporations didn't like those changes in the hydrocarbon law, in la ley de hidrocarburos. So that takes us back to the enabling laws that we were talking about before.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, that's actually very, I mean, that's a big answer on a lot of things, not just Chevron, but also all these enabling laws and stuff. And we can just say that Venezuela needs the income. And especially since we're talking about that everything is not fine and Venezuela is not fixed and all, we should remember that Venezuela lost 99% of its foreign income and has not been able to recover it because of the sanctions. So
That's
that's
true.
that's it. Like even if Venezuela has recovered a bit, it's like a drop in the ocean. So yeah,
I
it's
believe
not
that's
like a
something
point.
important. I believe that Steve said
Yes,
in
Steve
an
said.
event
Steve
that we
said it.
organized a few months ago. That
Hmm.
and I believe that it's important to make it graphic for some people. I mean, the income in Venezuela fell from 2013, I believe, or 2014 or to 2021 by 75%. So just to give you an idea, I mean, I'm talking about the GDP, the gross domestic product. I mean, the way the IMF measure how an economy grows or decreases. That means that if we produce 100, whatever, trillions of dollars, millions of dollars, or whatever, in 2013, we in 2021 only produce 25. So if the GDP growth in 2021 was 10%, that means that is 10% not out of those 100, but out of the 25. So I'm talking that the increase, the economic recovery that we experienced last year means that we have right now 27.5 of that is nothing if you compare it with the 100 that we produced in 2013. Do you see what I'm trying to show you? I mean, we are still very deep down there, disregarding the fact that we are experiencing an economic recovery. I believe that it's important to highlight that because some people criticize that the government is launching these initiatives to bring foreign investments, and some people criticize that we signed these agreements that we are happy because this general license was approved by OFAC a few days ago. And that's part of the answer. I mean, it's like we need resources and we don't have the levels of resources that we had 10 years ago. So I believe that it's important to remember those numbers that Steve raised a few months ago in an event that we had.
Right. So, and then there is our friend Yuri, of course, he's always asking a lot of questions. Okay. So, Yuri asked about two different things. I think those can be punched together. One is that since you have already talked of literacy and other missions, housing missions, literacy missions, health missions, etc., he is also asking about the missions for women's rights and indigenous peoples. That is one question. And the second one is that what are Venezuela's efforts in dealing with the climate crisis? This is actually a very important question because Venezuela is a country that is mostly dependent on selling oil. And well, so the question is how to reconcile these supposed contradictions. I might have to say something about it, but anyway, I'll let you speak about that, both the missions for women and for indigenous people, and also
And
for what Venezuela is doing with the
environmental,
climate crisis. Yeah.
that's fine. I mean, the indigenous approach of Chavismo is amazing. If you ask me, I mean, actually, the new constitution approved by Hugo Chavez help us. I mean, help the indigenous people to regain a lot of rights that they didn't have before. I mean, the government, if the government wants to do anything, a project in lands that belongs to indigenous people, they need to get the approval of the indigenous people. It's not like in the US or Canada that the government does whatever they want and the indigenous people start screaming and protesting and they repress them and they silence them and they buy them. Is different. I mean, actually, a few months after the approval of the Constitution, a big project of electric project between Brazil and Venezuela happened, and that affected indigenous areas, and the project was stopped like for several, because they needed to install these big torres, towers, electric towers to put like the wires. Basically, Venezuela was interconnecting itself with the north of Brazil, and because they are always with problems with electricity there, and we had our hydroelectrical plants in the south of the country, in Bolivar state that borders Brazil. So basically, they were trying to build these lines, electric lines between the two countries, and the Pemon and other indigenous people from that part of Venezuela. They stopped the project, and a few months or maybe 1 or 2 years later, they finally find the way that was beneficial for the indigenous people and for the government. We recognize indigenous languages, which many people call dialects, and to minimize the real relevance of yes, that's part of the problem in the communication. I mean, a lot of people talk about the language of the indigenous people like dialects. The same thing happened with religion. I mean, the religion that is practiced by Afro-Caribbeans I mean, people in the Caribbean, they call it like sects or whatever, but you know, it's part of the same Eurocentric racist approach towards us. And we open schools for kids in those areas that teach them in their own languages. We have electoral procedures especially designed for respecting the indigenous traditions. It's complex, but it happens. And when I talk about respecting the indigenous tradition, I'm talking about the assemblies that they organize and the way that they give more importance to the elder within some tribes, and those things are part of right now of the ways of Venezuela's approach towards indigenous people that is way different than what happened before. What happened before is the way that many countries in Latin America still have, which is basically we are the criollos in the capital, and we tell you what to do. And if you don't like it, you will be repressed. That's what basically happened, not only in Latin America, that happened even in the US, in Canada, all over. So that's what I can say right now, as far as with the things that come to my mind about the indigenous scene. Rights to women, if you ask me, I believe that we still are very behind of what I wish we have. I believe that that's a karma that we have as Latinos, machistas, which is terrible, but it's there. And that's a reality. It exists there. But we have achieved many things. I mean, Hugo Chavez, I really believe that he was a real feminist guy. I mean, he truly believed in the importance of having more women in power positions, and he had a lot of women as ministers. He created the ministry for women, and that ministry still exists in Venezuela. I mean, there were a lot of things that has been changing since Hugo Chavez took power. But one of the things that I believe that is most important is the one connected to the rights to their body. I mean, abortion, for example. We have very regressive and conservative laws in Venezuela in relation to abortion. Sorry, and what else? we still have problems of domestic violence, violence against women, like in many Latin American countries and other countries around the world. And the government has been trying to reduce that, but I believe that we can do more. What was the other part of the question? Environmental issues.
And yeah, environmental.
So, I mean, whenever someone could ask me about that, I immediately, what comes to my mind is Juan Vicente Gomez, as I mentioned you in the slideshow. I mean, was Juan Vicente Gomez making deals with those guys from the U.S. corporations exploiting oil in Venezuela? And I mean, I'm not trying to put the blame on the U.S. corporations, but they changed our economic landscape. That's a reality. It was not us. We were not asked to. I mean, we did not need that oil. That oil was needed in the U.S. and Europe. And of course, we ended up having the economic model that we currently have, that is very dependent on oil. And of course, oil itself is an ecology, you know, like an ecological weapon. It's like an ecological bomb. But you cannot blame us for that. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that a lot of people in the North do not make the analysis in the proper perspective that I'm trying to show you right now. That we can do better. I mean, for example, PDVSA, disregarding all the crises in recent years, have an incredible record in, you know, environmental impact. I mean, PDVSA has a very good record in avoiding oil spills. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen, but we have a very low rate in that particular area. Another thing important that many people do not know is that the electricity in Venezuela is like 70 or 75% relies on, not in oil, but on hydroelectrical plants. And that says a lot about, you know, our approach towards. Of course, hydroelectrical plants are also criticized by other people, environmentalists. But anyway, I mean, nothing is perfect. There's a lot of things that can be, you know, questioned and criticized if you want to criticize everything. But I'm just trying to show you a few things that we have been doing in order to make the impact of our main economic activity less damaging to the environment. But also, I already mentioned the things that we have been doing, trying to diversify. When I talk about the land reform, and I mentioned you all the efforts that we were doing in order to promote a fair, more justice, economic land development, agricultural development in the country. And we are, as I told you, I mean, we are seeing the results of that. And there's a big economic agricultural activity right now in Venezuela. And because of that activity is that we are eating, mainly because of the blockade, because of the sanctions. And it's amazing how the agricultural sector responded to the sanctions, because even in the worst moments of the sanctions, I'm talking about 2019, 2020. I mean, we see more. In Caracas, you see we have like street markets that I mean, with trucks that comes mostly from the west of Venezuela, from the Andes, where we have most of the agricultural lands. You see trucks that brought all the products that they produce, and they put their tents in the streets. And during those years, you see more of those trucks coming to Caracas than ever. So that when I saw that during those years, I realized that the gringos were not going to be able to defeat us that easy. So I hope that I answered your question, Yuri.
Yeah, sure. I would just add a very little bit of things regarding the climate crisis and all that thing, because it's mentioned a lot of times, but we should also look at the per capita emissions and the total emissions of a country also. Venezuela is
That's true.
responsible for only 0.4% of the greenhouse gas emissions last year. So that's like 0.4%. Let's compare it with the US, with Canada. Like Canada has a small population. Compare it that it has the highest per capita greenhouse gas emission in the world. So like Venezuela
How
is
much it is?
nothing.
Do you remember? Do you remember how much it is in
I'd
Canada?
have to oh well, I think Canadians here would remember better. Anyway, it's actually the per capita is the highest. Like when they were actually talking about China being a very polluting country, etc., it was the Chinese who were putting all this thing on social media that Canada is
That's
the
true.
the highest per capita polluting country in the world, and it's just about greenhouse gases. There are many other kinds of pollution that Venezuela does not do, but Western countries do. So just pointing fingers at oil producing countries and claiming that they are responsible for anything
Yes,
about climate is
it's
not true really.
hypocrisy.
It's not
Absolutely.
really true. So yeah, that's
Yes.
one thing I wanted to say, and I think I should give space to other people to speak.
Speak,
Yeah.
guys.
Can I be heard?
Yes.
I just wanted to shout you out, Jesus. This was a great talk, super informative, very combative to the imperialist narratives, which is exactly what we got to do. I got a homie in the chat, Milo, a dear friend. I think you touched on the garimbas in Venezuela, and you made a comparison to the garimbas of like Nicaragua. If you can generally just explain what the garimbas were and how they operated in Venezuela.
Yes, that's important. And one sometimes jump into saying guarimbas and not explaining why it is. And I believe that the question is important because, as I said, I mean, the guarimbas are the violent protests that are portrayed by mainstream media as peaceful protests. I believe that that's the most important part of them. But it's worse than that, actually. And that's why the question is good, because during the guarimbas, right-wingers, they, at least in the case of Venezuela, they go around their neighborhood, the places where they live, and they build barricades. And they burn tires and burn whatever they put in order to close the transit in their neighborhoods, but also in some important highways that are nearby, in avenues and roads. And that itself is an illegal action. You can have the right to protest everywhere, but your right to protest cannot go above to the right of transit, you know? I know that might sound contradictory because sometimes I applauded my compass in the US that close on roads. but that's the reality. I mean, you cannot deny that. I mean, it's against the law. You take it or not. I mean, you are assuming or not. In the case of our right wingers, they portray themselves like they are angels that that fell from heaven, and that they are peacefully closing roads and burning people and killing people. And the reality is that if you the problem is not that you break the law or not. The problem is how you portray yourself after you do that. If you portray yourself like, okay, I did that and I know that I broke the law, but I want to launch a rebellion. You know, you are taking the responsible approach. In the case of our people in Venezuela, what they always say is that I didn't do anything. I was just protesting, and the government is repressing me. I'm an angel. And that's part of the hypocrisy that they have. You know, if you want to promote a coup d'etat, do it. I mean, all the people have the right to rebel themselves if the conditions they face certain conditions. But you are going to break the law, and you're going to have to face the consequence of that, and you have to be responsible of not enough to recognize that you are breaking the law. I believe that I'm jumping to another very different subject, but anyway, I going back to the guarimbas, they basically did that, and they keep us, the ones that were not Chavista, I mean that were not right wingers, like kidnapped in our own neighborhoods. A lot of people cannot move, cannot go to work because they close all the roads. They attack. They put there's a terrible video of some policemen during the guarimbas in 2017 that were passing through a square in Caracas in Altamira in the east, where the right wingers live, and they basically put a bomb there, and those policemen jumped to the earth. You don't see that video very often, but that was part of the guarimbas. I mean, there was a lot of violence against the police, against the National Guard that is also responsible for, security issues here in Venezuela. So they exercise violence, but they portray themselves like they are just like protesting with a banner or something like that. So I don't know if that answered your question. I believe that something similar happened in Nicaragua. Right?
Yeah, for sure. When I was in Nicaragua, they were talking about it a lot. It was exactly what you described. Like people would set up little barricades, either with bricks and stuff like that, and stop you and ask you if you were left wing. They're like, are you Cuban? Are you Venezuelan? If you say yeah, you're gonna be in trouble. And that was a kind of way of it's just terrorism. It's just
they kill people. They kill people. In the case of Venezuela, they kill people, neighborhoods that were trying to move the barricades, and many Venezuelans died that way, being killed by the right wingers, by the guarimberos, as we call them. So it's violence. And when you listen to the media, you just read that they are like peaceful demonstrations, but it's a big lie. In most of the cases, I'm not saying that some of those, protests were non-violent, but in our case, it's like 95% were violent.
They were set up by violent people. Of course, they will be violent, and they were paid to be violent. So let's not forget about
that's
it. It was
another
like
part, that they were paid people also that exercise violence.
Just like it was similar in Nicaragua. They were like, when people tried to remove the barricades, they were killed. Like a lot of people said that. So anyway, that's well, I think we should be moving forward. And there is my friend Pedro asking a question about the Communist Party of Venezuela. He said,
Okay.
can you discuss the alliances that the PCV has made recently with the Venezuelan opposition?
Who made the question?
Pedro is a friend. Actually, he is actually
friend of yours.
Like a well-known
okay.
fan.
Okay.
Not
because
just a friend
I
of
know
mine.
another
I mean,
Pedro from the Communist Party, Pedro Euse, that I say, wow, Pedro
no,
is
this
listening to this.
This is Puerto Rican.
Pedro Euse is one of the leaders of the Communist Party here in Venezuela. And the other day I talked to him. I don't talk very often to him, but the other day, like a couple of months ago, I actually talked to him and told him that I was not, as we have transpired over the recent years, that we not agree with the approach that they had in recent years after they break with the government. I mean, you can break with the government if you want. I mean, the problem is that as the Communist Party of Venezuela did I believe that 2 years ago or so. So the problem is that you, from breaking with the government, jump to the right wingers' arms. That's the bad part. I mean, and that I believe that some people in the Communist Party might hate me for saying this, but that's my impression of what they has been doing. When we had the last elections here in Venezuela last year, they had a meeting with the European Union saying all the, I mean, like any other right-wing party had meetings with the European Union. They had their meetings and they were saying all the atrocities that the Venezuelan government was doing in the elections, which is a big lie. I mean, I'm not saying that elections are perfect in Venezuela. I believe that elections are not perfect anywhere. But saying that the government of Venezuela is responsible for irregularities that avoided our elections is a big lie. And they were saying something like that in that meeting with the European Union. I hear a few weeks ago, a person from Patria para Todos. Patria para Todos is one of those parties that joined the Alianza Popular Revolucionaria, APR, which was some sort of coalition that the Communist Party organized with some political parties, friend of them, to try to present candidates for the last elections. Not only the regional ones, the parliamentary ones that we had last year, but also the regional ones that we have the year before, I believe. So, so that guy in this radio interview was talking about PPT participating in the opposition primaries. And PPT is the leader of PPT, that is Rafael Uzcategui, is a very close friend of the leader of the PCB. I mean, they are the same people. I mean, of the leadership of the PCB, of the Communist Party of Venezuela. So I believe that they are like pointing at the right direction. I mean, that they are aiming their attacks at the wrong direction, and they doing that are joining the forces of other leftist organizations that ended up in nothing, like Marea Socialista, like Bandera Roja, Movimiento al Socialismo, other leftist or extreme left parties that joined the opposition a few years ago and right now are nothing. And it's a shame because I always been sympathetic to the Communist Party, and I always felt more connected to the Marxist-Leninist approach than to the approach of the PSUV. If you ask me, if you want me to be very honest about that, I believe that the PCB has a better cadre formation. The PSUV lacks a lot of that. But what they are doing is not right, and I cannot say that what they are doing is right. So I don't know if that answered the questions, but it's basically that they are accusing Maduro of being repressive. They are taking all the talking points of Washington and recycling it, trying to make them sound a little bit anti-imperialist. But they keep pushing them of Maduro being anti-democratic, a human rights strong man, repressor, you name it. I mean, of having elections, rigged elections, of implementing neoliberal packages and abandoning the legacy of Hugo Chavez and all this stuff. And the reality is that Maduro has been doing, I'm not saying that I feel that Maduro is the toughest Marxist-Leninist person that I've seen. I don't think that Maduro is actually a Marxist-Leninist, if you ask me. But I believe that he is doing way better than the Communist Party. At least in these recent years of struggle that we have been facing, Maduro has been doing an amazing job. And as I mentioned in the presentation, since the first day he took office, he has been attacked by the right wingers and now by the gringos and the Europeans. So it's not an easy task. And I admire the way that he has been also being able to recover the economy in recent months. So attacking Maduro with far left, extreme left positions, just because you hate it, because he didn't give you what you wanted at some moment, because PCV has been always in alliance with the government since President Chavez was in office, but they break with the government like 2 or 3 years ago. So I don't know exactly why, but I believe that they felt that they were not taken into consideration enough or whatever. I don't know. I really don't know. But you can break with the government if you are in disagree with the government. But from there, again, to shake hands with the right wingers, that's not the right, way to do things, if you ask me.
The reason that the PCV gave for breaking with the government was, of course, the anti-blockade law, and they did it like 2 years ago in 2020 when the anti-blockade law was approved. So yeah, they were saying that anti-blockade law was basically selling off Venezuelan resources to the foreigners, etc. Although, of course, the constitution does not allow it and all that. But they were just saying that through the anti-blockade law, because there is this thing about keeping the identities of the investors and the companies secret, that this is actually a tool of selling off resources without letting people know. It was a very bad, like it is a very bad faith argument, because lots of countries, most of the, I mean, more than a third of the world's population is under sanctions now. So a lot of countries have similar laws, and nobody is
And
doing
also,
things
and
like
they
that.
talk a lot also, sorry to interrupting you, but they talk a lot about Maduro pulverizing the wages of the Venezuelan, the poor Venezuelan people. It was not Maduro. I mean, it was the U.S. aggression, the European aggression, the one that has been pulverizing. Since Chavez took office, and then when Maduro was in power, we had very good wages, salaries in Venezuela. And all that ended up in 2017 or 2018 when they began with the whole aggression against PDVSA, and then in 2019 when they completely, launched their attacks with sanctions and blockade against Venezuela. And of course, that created hyperinflation, that created a crazy devaluation of the Bolivar, and the salaries went down the drain. And that's a reality, but you cannot blame Maduro for that. I mean, the government has been trying to make the economy do better. I mean, it's not better, of course, right now, but we are way better than 2 years ago. And the whole idea of the government is trying to make it better in the years to come. And I hope that happens, because the situation here is tough. Prices are going up. Even though we are basically a dollarized economy currently, the inflation affects you a lot.
Yeah, because it's a dollarized economy, there could be more inflation also. I'm not saying that it is because of the reason, but it could be. But let's not talk economy. I'm just thinking, because you have also mentioned Rafael Caldera. PCV was in government with him also, and then there was
and the PPT, yes.
And of course, since you mentioned Movimiento al Socialismo, I should mention that this MAS is different from the Bolivian one. It's a different
Yes,
party.
absolutely. It's
The
not the same
Venezuelan
thing.
one is the Venezuelan one is a different party, and both PCV and MAS were in government with Caldera, but they had to leave because he was so neoliberal. So I guess, I hope PCV wakes up this time also.
And the Communist
Like
Party, I
it is.
believe that was part of Caldera's also.
Yes,
if you ask me.
Communist
Right
Party
now,
was part of.
and it's terrible because the guy, Caldera, privatized everything. As I mentioned, go ahead, Sahih. Sorry for interrupting.
Actually, that is why PCV broke from that government. So they are broke it from that government for the right reason, but this time they're doing it for the wrong reason. So that's very bad. Like, they're not really progressing, if you ask me. Anyway, so that, I think that was all the people had asked. I think there might be even more, but if we continue, we'll remain here forever.
Forever,
So,
yes. And we're reaching the 2 hours already.
We've crossed the 2 hours, I think.
Yes.
So anyway,
So if there's no other question, we can do the closing. But if you have something else there.
I think we should do a closing up. I mean, we could go on discussing things forever, but I think we should be doing a closing, and we could just have more episodes in future. Of course, we should not be finishing everything here.
Yes. I was thinking, taking into consideration something that we discussed a few days ago in our last meeting, I'm talking about our last Orinoco Tribune meeting, that maybe we should do something like, I was thinking in a name that Venezuela True Squad with these short videos that Robert, I believe, was the one that proposed.
It was Mateo.
Talking, Mateo, talking about Venezuela, but with short videos, you know, talking about, you know, people are dying in the street because there's no food in Venezuela, and making a short video showing people that people are not dying in the streets. I mean, even in the worst moment of, you know, the aggression against Venezuela, that didn't happen, you know, and things like that, you know, like writing down several, like 10 or 15 of those talking points that you read everywhere all the time in mainstream media, and making those short videos. That might be good. I'm just sharing that idea with you, taking into consideration the recommendations that you raised in the last meeting. Sorry, Sahi, for stopping you again.
No, I am not. I want to be stopped. So I think we should be closing this up if we do not want to spend here all day. So I would ask like Sarah to just talk about, well, about whatever Jesus said, new projects, donations, and whatever else you wished.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, sounds great. Thanks. So first of all, as we wrap up the 4th anniversary event, I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed the presentation and the conversation on Chavismo. Thank you to Jesus again for a fantastic presentation. Yeah, and thank you to everyone for tuning in, for your questions, and for your support of Orinoco Tribune. As we said earlier, we're 100% reader funded, so we don't receive any funding from governments, businesses, or NGOs. And currently right now, we're also expanding. We're doing a lot more kind of multimedia content along with our regular website content. We're doing live streams like this. We're doing video interviews here on our YouTube channel. And we depend entirely on donations to do this. As Sahili said earlier, we currently have a pledge drive to increase our monthly donations. So if you want to donate, you can make monthly donations through the Alliance for Global Justice or through our Patreon. Or you can also do one-time donations through PayPal, or we have an Amazon wedding registry as well. If you want to directly contribute equipment, that would make our work a lot easier and more efficient. All and any donations are very welcome and extremely valuable to us. Thank you to everyone who's already donated. And so I believe that's all, unless anyone would like to add anything else.
That's it, Sarah.
I'd like to shout out Shaheli, who's up at like, I don't know, what, 3 in the morning? What time is it over there? It must be India.
Yes,
She deserves all the props for everything.
That's true.
For
I'm losing you.
facilitating the whole thing. It was a wonderful presentation, and
Thank you, friends. Thank you. If anyone want to add something, you are free to do it. Thank you all for being here and making this happen. Un abrazo, compas. Bye-bye. I'm gonna stop.